Okay, today we're going to talk about our place in the animal kingdom a little bit. And we're also going to turn our attention to the origins of where humans came from, the very beginnings of that. We're going to spend a few chapters talking about human origins, but it'll take it's a big that's a big subject. So it's going to take a few chapters to get through all of the past that led to us. But there's a discipline that is adjacent to anthropology, which is a subsection of biology, which looks at specific groups of creatures. There are people that study insects. There are people that study fish. There are people that study bacteria. There are people that study plants. All of these things are subdisciplines within biology. And one of those subdivisions is people who study the order Primates. And that includes us, but it's much larger than us. Because if you recall, Carolus Linnaeus created a system for drawing a box around each species. But each species belongs to a larger and larger and larger group, right? So we're not plants. We're animals. But so is a sponge, so is a cockroach, so is a snake. So if you recall, the taxonomic system is a nested system with the largest categories up here and narrowing focus to a species, which means specifically this particular animal. That's who I'm talking about. So we name all the life on Earth according to this nested system. So that, once again, that's kingdom, phylum, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? Kings play cards on fat green stools. In between those, there are also some subdivisions. We're not going to get into those. Those are a little bit more specific, but I will mention a couple things today that are relevant to our discussion of trying to narrow our focus into who we are. But one of those classifications, order, is primates, and that's what we're going to talk about. Primatology is the study of living and past primates. So kingdom, if we want to say what is a human, we can just name that what we are, right? So what is our scientific name for us as a biological being? Well, first of all, animalia. We're animals, right? We're not plants, we're not fungus. We're animalia. So that's our first broadest name. But we share that animalia with a whole range, any animal life on Earth, from the smallest to the largest. But amongst animal life, there is a pretty big subdivision, which is called phylum, the next below kingdom, which is chordata. And early life, billions of years ago, well, about 1 billion years ago or so, you started to have multicellular organisms start to specialize. And one of those specializations was a little bit of internal organization, which included a central nervous system, a dorsal spinal, dorsal nerve that connected like a brain to its nervous system. And that also created bilaterality. There's all sorts of definitions for what chordata are. And that's the branch that we started going out into. So the fact that we have a brain and a spinal column and spinal cord and a nervous system and nerve endings and all of these sorts of things are the fact that we share those in common with all other chordates. That includes very basic life, some types of worms have that sort of structure to them with a brain and a nerve that goes down there and a dorsality, their dorsal and then bilaterality on either side. So we share chordata with the worm or some types of worms. But we're not all that similar to worms, right? There's also those chordates that have skeletal structures, for instance, but that also includes snakes and chickens and all these sorts of things, right? So we have some other characteristics that set us aside from reptiles and birds and fish and insects. That is to say that we are mammals, and that's the next subdivision, which is class. And so the class of animals that we are mammals, and we share that with elephants and whales and bears and dogs and cats and bats. All of these things are mammals, and they have hair. They give live birth. They produce milk. These are all things that all or most mammals share. And so we are in that class. And amongst that class of mammals, are we that similar to a bat? Well, yeah, we're more similar to a bat than we are to a worm, right? But we're more similar to all other primates because we branched out from all other mammals. So all animals branched out, and we're on the chordate branch. And amongst chordates, we branched off into the mammalia branch. And amongst those mammalians, all of those other sort of things are going off in those directions, and we are on the primate branch. And primates include a range of characteristics. And this isn't just us thinking about forms. We now are able to test genetic similarities, and this has confirmed what centuries ago people had placed us into this categorization. So we now know for certain that we are primates, and we share a lot of similarities with all other primates. Now, that's what I want to talk about today, is this grouping. And we're also going to start talking about our origins as primates, because this defines some of the characteristics that we have. Why do we have big brains? Why do we have color vision and forward-facing eyes? Why do we have the teeth that we have? Why do we have grasping hands? Why do we walk on two legs rather than four legs? These are all characteristics that arose from evolutionary processes of natural selection, but understanding how we're the same and how we're different tells us a lot about who we are and where we came from. So something that we need to understand from very early on is that the word phylogeny relates to the genetic relatedness based on common ancestry, right? So that is to say, I am like this other creature because somewhere in the past we weren't split. We had we're sort of cousins, that we shared a common ancestor, maybe in the distant past. In fact, all life on Earth is related in that way. But there are also ways that you can be similar that do not relate to phylogeny. This is the difference between what's called an analogy and a homology. An analogy is a similarity between two creatures based on what's called convergent evolution. That is to say, they're not really very closely related to one another, but natural selection has selected certain characteristics that are similar because they are adapting to similar environmental pressures. That is to say, something like a bird is not very closely related to a bat, but they both fly. A bird is an avian creature, whereas a bat is a mammalian creature, right? So they split a long time ago in terms of ancestry. And a bat is closer related to us than it is to a bird, but they both fly. And that's because if you want to eat insects that fly around in the air, you better take to wing. You better adapt wings. And so this built up through times where bats acquired this characteristic. But the fact that a bird and a bat can both fly does not mean that they're genetically related very closely. The same thing could be said for a dolphin or a whale and a fish. Dolphins and whales are mammals. They're close, have more in common with you genetically than they do with the fish, because this is convergent evolution. That if you want to swim around in the water, you better have a fin, and you better have a flipper, and you better be very sleek. But whales have, if you look at their flippers, they actually have hand bones in there. They've got 5 fingers, just covered by a flipper. So at one point, whales were actually land creatures that started to adapt to an aquatic lifestyle, and through generation after generation of natural selection, they became full-time aquatic mammals. Right. So the reason why I'm saying this is because we need to make distinctions between things like, we're not the only creatures that have forward-facing eyes. Cats and dogs do, bears do, squirrels don't, actually. But there's a lot of animals that have forward-facing eyes, right? And so do primates. Primates tend to have forward-facing eyes, but are we very closely related to a bear? If not, why are we more closely related to a monkey or a gorilla? Well, we now, like I said, we now can test this based on genetic verification, but we already knew this because of characteristics that we shared, a whole suite of characteristics that biology told us was part of shared ancestry. So this was a homology. That is to say, we have things in common with primates, other primates, because we share a common ancestor way back in time. Whereas bears have forward-facing eyes and some other characteristics, not because of that, but because they have adapted an analogous situation based on a different set of conditions. Right. Now, I've gone through and I've talked about taxonomy, and I said that we're going to limit it to kings play cards on fat green stools, that is to say, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. But we also subdivide beyond that from time to time if it is useful for us. And anthropologists use a taxonomic level that is it's below the level of family. It's in between family and genus. And our genus is Homo sapiens. Our family is Hominidae. And there is a useful subdivision that is called a tribe, which includes, which is called the Hominini, it describes all human species that have ever existed, with the exception of chimps and gorillas. So chimps and gorillas, or actually chimps are our closest relationship. Gorillas are not far off, but we split with them about maybe 8 to 12 million years ago. And so after that time, there's a whole cluster of primates that are closer to us and on the path towards us, or at least closer relation to us. They could have even been our competitors. They're all extinct now. We're the only survivors of that whole branch. Chimpanzees are the only survivor of that other branch, and gorillas another branch. So, but we're going to be looking at the fossil record in the next few chapters, and that hominini are all the human species that we're going to be talking about. Those are our ancestors, or extinct species that would have been our competitors that don't exist anymore. And it's important to understand why we have these characteristics, is that we want to look at where the baseline is, that how do all primates exist? Why are primates a category? What do they share in common? Because then we can say, okay, this is what all primates share, but what did our branch, the hominini, start to do in this direction that led to us being us? Why are we different from all other primates? So in order to figure that out, we have to understand what primates are and where they come from. And don't forget, we are primates. You are a primate. So A very important aspect of primate biology is that a lot of these homologies that we share, the similarities based on ancestral and genetic relationships, is that our ancestors emerged in forests. This is what's called an arboreal adaptation. Arbor refers to forests, and so arboreal is an adaptation for living in and moving around in trees. So whereas a cheetah or a leopard might have forward-facing eyes for depth perception, which relates to pouncing on prey, or being able to gauge distance for chasing them down. It's a little bit different for primates. We have forward-facing eyes because, all primates do in fact, because moving around in trees might require you to jump from one branch to the next branch, and if you don't have three-dimensional vision, you're going to miss that branch, and that could be a killer for you. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, squirrels are also adapted to living in trees and moving around in trees, and so are raccoons, and their eyes are on the sides of their faces. Yes, that's true. They have actually different facilities that we lost. We started to concentrate, or primates started to concentrate on vision as their primary sense, or their one of their most important sense. The other one being fingers, grasping. A lot of creatures don't really place very much emphasis on being able to touch stuff. Some can, but this is a real important thing for us. Also, if a dog can't see something, or a squirrel can't see something, or a raccoon can't see it, they still know it's there because they can smell it. Now, have you ever tried to compare your sense of smell to a dog's sense of smell? We're not even close. We're not close to most creatures, but we share this with all other primates, that our sense of smell is not very developed. We lost that. Now remember back to natural selection, about its competition for resources. It would be great to have everything. It would be terrific if we could just have wings and scales and fangs and claws and gills and hawk vision, but also 360 vision, and it would be great to be able to have everything at once, but you've got to pay for that. You're competing for resources, and so what works is what works in natural selection. And so if you can get away with surviving on one trait, you're going to start to lose the other traits, which just are expensive in terms of resources. So if you don't need your nose, then you'll lose that ability after a few generations. And if you are relying on your vision, you're going to have to protect that for survival. And we see that happening too in things like bone structure, which we'll come to in a moment. So what are these things that all primates have, that natural selection was concentrating into them as a branch that was going out and surviving in a forest-like situation? Well, like I said, ability to grasp. All primates have the ability to grasp. And before you start writing your essay about how important opposable thumbs are, all primates have some opposability to their thumbs. All of them do. So we're not really that special. We have the most opposability, but that's not really that big of a deal. I want you to sort of, I know this is a common thing that people talk about as being so important for humans, the opposable thumb. It's not. It's not the thing that sets us apart from other primates. All primates have that. So you might say, okay, well, look at a chimpanzee using a human tool. They can't do it as well. Well, if a chimpanzee were to make a tool on their own, they would make it differently from us because they have different hands. So our tools fit our hands because we've made them, right? So we would make them differently if we had different hands. So, but it is important to remember that our fingers and our sense of touch, especially the dermal ridges that you have on your fingertips, and your fingernails are actually protecting extremely sensitive indicators of touch. And that's why you have fingernails, is so you don't harm yourself. But it also allows you to very sensitively touch things. And so the hands are instead of the nose, instead of some other senses that we might have, hearing, our sense of touch is extremely important to us. Also, the eyes are an expensive organ to invest in. And so if you're going to have emphasis on vision, you're going to start to lose some other expensive organs. And another expensive organ is the sense of smell. So you start to see, as the eyes start to develop in primates as a more important organ, the nose shrinks and becomes flatter, and the part of the brain that interprets the signals from the olfactory sense shrinks as well, because you don't need that portion of the brain. Other portions of the brain, things like memory and vision interpretation, start to be enhanced. So our sight isn't just one aspect too. It's stereoscopic vision, which gives you your sense of depth perception. I don't know if you know anyone who has, I have a friend who only has vision in one eye, and he gets very, very irritated when I throw things at him because he has a hard time judging when objects are coming at him. The eye placement, forward facing, allows us to have stereoscopic vision. The organization of the brain allows us to interpret the signals that we're getting. But also things like color vision allow us to select plants and that might be poisonous for us from ones that might be available to us. So the ability to see in color is an important thing as well. That it's not just finding food, it's finding the right food for what your diet has adapted to. So some things have toxins in them. Some things are ripe at different times. Some primates choose the ripest fruits. Some choose the unripest fruits. And that allows them to outcompete their fellow creatures by selecting what kind of foods they have. So color vision allows you to be a little bit more selective about what you are choosing to eat. But you also then don't need to rely on the sense of smell to make those decisions. Brain complexity and brain size is also something that primates tend to have. That we're clever. Even the stupidest of primates, the smallest monkeys and even prosimians are pretty clever. Cleverer than some other types of mammals, and certainly cleverer than a lot of other, like a lizard or something like that, which are almost walking instinct. The brain areas in a primate devoted to thought, memory, and associations, making connections, are more elaborate and larger in primates than in most other mammals even.